to Robot Unicorn, hosted by my parents, Jess and Scott. I hope you enjoyed the episode.
Hi, Jessica. How are you?
Good morning. Good. How are you?
Great.
Really? Great.
Yeah. Wonderful.
Why?
I don't know. We celebrated Canada Day yesterday, so I'm feeling spry, you know. We had a day off in the middle of the week.
Yeah, that was kind of nice.
Yeah.
Pool day.
Spent the whole afternoon in the pool, which was nice. Mm-hmm. How are you doing?
I'm good. I feel like I have a lot on my mind today. Just a lot of things I'm working on and projects on the go.
Oh, like related to work?
Yeah, related to work. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Just, trying to write a book and,
That's not that hard, is it?
yeah. We're very excited about the book, by the way.
Yeah. So today we're going to talk about birth order. Mm-hmm. It was brought up by a friend to me last week, so I kind of...
See, I didn't even know that this was brought up to you. All of a sudden, this was just a topic. Like, I don't remember us talking about this being a topic.
I'm pretty sure I told you that. But anyways, it was brought up by a friend, and I was like, yeah, you know what? I've always thought of doing that, but I keep forgetting that I want to do an episode on it. So today, we're finally doing that episode. And let me tell you, the research was very interesting, and my opinion on things has changed significantly.
Yeah, Scott's been really excited about this, but also not telling me anything. So I really don't know where this conversation's going today, but I'm excited to see what you have in store for us with this episode.
Well, I feel like we've probably all heard the stereotypes of the oldest child being a certain way, the middle child being another way, the youngest being different, or only children being a certain way. So it was kind of nice to dive into that. Mm-hmm. And full disclosure, Jess and I are the best in the birth order, right? We're the oldest, obviously.
Yeah.
No, I'm just kidding. It'll all become more clear as we go through it.
We're excited.
But yeah, full disclosure, we're both the oldest of three in both of our families.
Mm-hmm. It gives.
Does it? Yeah. Maybe it does. Maybe it doesn't.
We'll find out.
We will find out. So actually, the first thing I wanted to ask, because I tried asking this earlier today and you refused to answer me. So I'll ask it again now. How much do you actually know about birth order? Have you looked into any of the research before or learned about any of this in school at all?
Yeah, so I'll say in school we learned about it a little bit, and about 4 or 5 years ago I did my own kind of research on the topic. So I'll tell you where I ended up with it, and then you'll tell me if the more recent research aligns with what I think. So when I originally started doing my own research on birth order a bunch of years ago, I went in with the idea that there's definitely like these clear roles in the family, right? Like your traditional, like your oldest is your more responsible one. Your middle maybe is a bit more sensitive, or, maybe a bit more wild child kind of vibe. And then your youngest is, baby of the family, happy-go-lucky, kind of gets whatever they want, more extroverted. So that's kind of what I went into it with thinking. But then in my research those years ago, what I found was that there's actually not a lot of research to support the fact that the kids do play these roles. And it's more about how the parents parent each child differently and how each child relates to the parents, kind of given their own experience with the parents. And then that being said, so when I was trying to find research all those years ago, I wasn't finding research that to me really backed up that consistently there are these roles, but that there are these stereotypes, and that sometimes the kids do fit into the roles, or we have these kind of preconceived notions about what roles the kids should fit into. So that's kind of where I ended up, and I don't know. I have no idea where you ended up,
Yep.
but...
So I would say what you've said there is partially true.
Okay.
So we can go through that. Essentially, the hypothesis I was trying to test here was there is an effect. So that was what I went in thinking, that there is an effect based on birth order, and it affects a child's personality.
Yeah.
But again, all of this is based on not as children, but as adults. So after they've kind of come out of it and they're living on their own. So there's a personality effect, there's an intelligence effect, and there's a life outcome and choices effect. So like the things that they choose to do afterwards, there's effects in those three areas. And what you're talking about with how we parent, that is a significant factor. That's probably the most significant factor outside of genetics. So, in terms of personality.
Right.
So the parenting, the method in which we parent seems to have the biggest effect on all of those outcomes in terms of personality, intelligence, and the life outcomes and choices.
Right, which makes total sense to me because you're going to see those patterns, right? Because with your first child, you're new, you're doing it for the first time, maybe you're more stressed out, right? So it makes sense that it's their birth order, that because they're the first, so you're learning it for the first time, but also it has to do with the parenting, right? Because you might parent your first child different. Let's say if you have 3 like us, by the time the third one comes around, you're like, we've been here before, these things aren't as big a deal. Like you're just more relaxed. So then of course that impacts the way that they act, right? So I think that was my interpretation of the research was the kids maybe fall into these categories because as parents, you parent a little bit differently for each of the kids depending on the stages. But at the same time, let's say families who have one kid and then maybe like a 10-year age gap and then they have another kid, it might look different. Or if they have like 2 kids and then a huge age gap and then 2 more kids, it might look different. So it's not necessarily in that case, just specifically like you're destined to have this result if you're a second child. It really kind of depends on a lot of factors.
Yes, that is what my mind changed on. I went into this thinking it was a little more simple, I think, than it actually is. And I can't remember what episode we talked about this, but this is again one of those situations where I think there's hundreds, if not thousands of variables that change or change how a child grows and develops into adulthood. So this is again one of those situations because it's not only how we parent. So that is one thing. It's also, let's say in our family, what I was understanding at least is that we have to be a little more careful because we have same sex children. So there tends to be a bit more competition when you have, let's say, 3 kids that are all the same sex versus if we had a boy in the middle, and like it kind of, that changes things. What I came to the conclusion of is originally, I think it was Alfred Adler came up with this idea of individual psychology, I think it was, where children are kind of fighting for the attention. They're trying to show that they are valuable in the world. Yeah. And maybe that's an oversimplification of his theory, but and he created these like stereotypes for children at different stages, whether it's firstborn, middleborn, laterborn, and then single children. Yeah. But most of that has been refuted. Not all of it. There are still some statistically significant results that I found, but it's so minor that in day-to-day life you wouldn't see it. And I think what I found is that a lot of the earlier research was, let's say, firstborn children were compared in family A to firstborn child in family B. But that's not a great way of... You can't compare 2 different families who have very different circumstances versus you can compare family A's firstborn versus their laterborn children to see what outcome differences are there later in life.
Yeah, and you really have to look long term. Like if a study is only looking at them for 2 years, it's kind of hard to see, is this actually going to have a long-term impact?
Right. Honestly, it was so interesting though, because I thought there would be much bigger effects, but it sounds like there are some statistically significant effects of birth order. And it's not necessarily just because of the order in which a child was born. It's just we see that there's a relationship between firstborn children. And the biggest thing was the career outcomes.
Interesting.
So firstborn children are typically or more likely to be in a position of CEO or managerial position, versus later born children are much more likely to be self-employed and run their own businesses.
Interesting.
Which it was a pretty significant difference. But overall, let's say with personality traits, the effect is basically nothing. Like there is a tiny effect, but in the grand scheme of things, when we see our children older, there's very little difference in terms of personality, except for the unless you control for like socioeconomic status, the size of the family apparently makes a huge difference. So I don't know. The problem with this topic is I feel like I'm not going to be able to give, I'm not going to do it justice, because it's so complex. It's so much more complex than I thought.
Yeah, I think a lot of people think birth order, and like I said, you think, okay, firstborn, leader, rule follower, secondborn, wild child, thirdborn, everybody loves, happy. Like, at least that's kind of what I thought when I went into it, right?
Yep.
But yeah, there's so many factors, right? That's assuming someone has 3 children, right? What if you have 1? What if you have 2? What if you have 7 kids? Like, you can't just assume they're going to fit into these boxes, right? And of course, your birth order in your own life is going to have an impact, right? I think you talk to anyone who's any order in the family, right? And they will talk about the way that impacted them.
Yes.
Right? For example, I think about our youngest, like she, assuming our 2 older girls go off to university, she will have years at home without her sisters there, right? That has an impact on you, I know.
Yeah, the only one that won't is our middle child.
The only one that won't, is our middle child, right?
Yeah.
So, she will always have siblings there. But then you think of being a middle child, right? Like I think of our middle child. She never had that one-on-one time with us.
Yep.
And she was 2 when our baby was born. So her toddler years were very different than our last born child, because our last born child, she's 3 and we don't have a baby. We've never had a child who's 3 and not had a baby in the house. So we can do things like lay with her longer to sleep, have longer bedtimes. So we can't say birth order doesn't have an impact on you. But I think what you're trying to say is that it's not like a neat and tidy box, the way that it impacts you. You can't just say you're...
Yeah, it's much too, like, I can't remember what episode we talked about this too, but as humans, we want this very simple explanation for the things that we see, and then we start looking for things that confirm that. So we have confirmation bias. We are looking for those things that confirm what we originally thought, and then we think, oh, yeah, this makes total sense. When in reality, the differences, the long-term or lasting effects are essentially nothing.
Yeah, and I thought that was funny because right off the top of this episode, I was like, yeah, we're giving firstborn children, right? But yeah. I've talked about this with you before. I think in certain circumstances, you appear like your typical firstborn child, right?
You're talking about me.
Yeah. You're a strong leader. You're independent, self-sufficient. You're the one that your siblings turn to, all of those things, right? So in those ways, very much you're your typical, stereotypical firstborn child. But you also have another family, which would be your uncles and aunts, because you grew up at your grandparents' house a lot of the time.
Yeah, I spent, as a kid, most of my time I lived at my grandparents.
Okay, so most of Scott's time as a child, he lived at his grandparents. And in that family, how many siblings? 7?
Well, yeah, but when I was there, would have been 5 of them.
Right.
Like when I first started.
Yes.
And then very quickly after, it was usually 3.
Right. So he also grew up in another family where there was these older, they're actually his aunts and uncles, but they're not that much older than him. Right. So they kind of acted as older siblings to you. And when you're around that family, it's so interesting because you kind of change. And that's where I can see the baby of the family coming out. Right. Scott will, like, you know, he's the one to make jokes. He's the one to, like, everyone has a soft spot for him. Like, you can pretty much say anything and get away with it. Everyone's laughing.
Yeah, my grandma will just like slap me on the arm. Oh,
Yeah.
Scott.
Yeah, grandma will just slap Scott. Scott, come on. You know, but he can get away with anything in the way that you would see a stereotypical baby of the family. So I think for you, actually, it's very interesting because you hold kind of both of those roles. And I think in a way that has shaped who you are, right? Because not only did you have younger siblings, but you also had these older, I mean, aunts and uncles, but they felt more like siblings when you were a kid.
Right.
So I think that's why I'm saying, like, it definitely has an impact on us, but it's not always so simple as to just say, oh yeah, you're just an oldest, so you act like this.
Yeah, it's again that the nature versus nurture discussion. It's honestly both.
Yeah.
It's certain things are slightly more weighted towards nurture. So how you're raised and the situation that you grew up in, or the situation that you are in. But then other things are maybe not more heavily weighted, but they're more significantly impacted. So personality apparently is quite significantly impacted based on genetics.
That makes sense.
So yeah, I don't know. I found this very interesting, and I learned a new, let's say, term. It's not a real term, but the idea of a zombie theory, which is a theory in science that doesn't die. So the idea of birth order, really it should die. It's not.
Yeah.
It's far too complex to say, yes, there is this order, and based on the order, you're much more likely to be this way. It's far more complex than that, because one thing you didn't mention, but is also significant, is older children are typically more mature. So we think our oldest child is the most mature.
Yes.
But it's because they're the oldest.
Yep.
Versus, let's say, our 3-year-old is much more free-spirited, but she's also a preschooler, toddler age, right? Which, when our oldest was at that age, if you really think back, was pretty much the exact same.
Oh yeah, you watch videos, they're the exact same. But everyone looks at our 3-year-old and they're like, oh, such a baby of the family.
Yeah.
Right? But actually, in reality, our oldest was the same when she was that age. But they have very similar temperaments, I will say. Right?
But that's potentially a personality or
Yeah.
like that side of things, right? Which, again, is less to do with birth order and more to do with genetics and how.
Yeah, that's
how
what I'm
we're
trying to
raised.
say, right?
Yeah.
Like, and I wonder how much of it is confirmation bias too.
Well, that's what I'm trying to say, is it is largely because of confirmation bias. Even myself, I'm realizing, I'm thinking about all these different things that our kids do. And then I'm now realizing, oh yeah, I'm just confirming what I already thought about birth order. Meanwhile, if I truly try and compare them at the same ages, they're not that drastically different. But because now our oldest is not that age anymore, we're kind of comparing the maturity level she's at versus the maturity level our 5-year-old and our 3-year-old is at.
Yeah, and I think about the second child because they often get labeled, wild child or whatever. But often it's the same, it's exact same thing because you have an older child and then you have another baby and then they reach the toddler age and you're like, they're crazy. But actually they're just being a toddler the same way your oldest child was a toddler. It's just your oldest child is older and more mature now. And so you see the second child as being this wild second child. And also to add on top of it, they have an older sibling, which your first child never had an older sibling. So of course there's going to be more tantrums, more fights about things because your older child, it was just them.
Yep.
So yeah, I think a lot of it just actually makes sense behaviorally that.
Yeah. And that's the thing, again, there's so many different variables that go into it that simplifying it down to birth order, actually, you can't do it.
Do you think confirmation bias is potentially damaging to our children? Like if we have these labels of first is, rule follower, second wild child, third happy-go-lucky baby of the family, is there potential harm to having these biases?
I feel like you're the better person to answer this. The way I would think about it is it can be damaging if let's say we label our oldest as the most mature and kind of the mini parent in the family, and therefore parentify them and make them parent their siblings and not allow them to do the things that kids their age should do. And I think same with the later born children, if you were to kind of let them get away with anything because they're the babies, they're younger. Whether it's damaging or not, I don't know, but it would be counterproductive to use birth order as a way to parent, unless you're going to try and counteract that. So now with the information I know, especially with same-gendered children, there's potential for much more competition where they're going to try and one-up each other. And I think it's important to make sure that you're parenting each unique child, but not based on the label of where they are in the birth order and what you expect that child should be like based on where they are in the birth order. So our middle child, you don't want to make them I think often they would be considered more of a peacemaker. So they're trying to like make everyone happy and make sure that if someone's sad, they're the ones that are going to go and help them. And that's often what I found people expect.
And there's also like a stereotype for the middle child, they're the peacemaker, but they're also the ones who are forgotten about. I think there's like that stereotype too.
Higher levels of anxiety and everything because they're forgotten about, which honestly, the research doesn't suggest that can't be true if you're assuming that if you parent them in the way that you say, oh, this is the middle child. So, or you actually forget about them.
I see this damage happening a lot to the older children, right?
Because of parentification?
Because of parentification. Because we're like, oh, they're more mature. Because it's exactly what you said. Of course they're more mature. They're the oldest, right? But then we think, oh, they're more mature. They love to help out with their siblings. So they can always help me out. They can be a mini parent. And I don't think it's a bad idea to give responsibility to all your children, right? Especially age appropriate as they get older. But I do see a lot of oldest children turning into these mini parents, especially when there's lots of kids in the family. And I think we can tell ourselves, oh, like they want to be like this, they're the oldest. Of course, they're more mature and responsible. But we have to, I think about this a lot because I know our oldest, she'll do anything we ask, right? Because she is a rule follower. She does want to be helpful. And I do think to myself, okay, when our youngest is this age, would I be asking her to help me with the same things? When our middle child is this age, will I have the same expectation on her? I try and think about that so that I can ask her to do things that I think are fair for her to do and not ask her to help me raise her little siblings because that's not her job, right? Her job is to play and have fun and be 8 and have some responsibilities, but not raising her siblings.
Yeah, I think what we're trying to say is not that you don't give your children responsibilities, but they have to be developmentally appropriate and, reasonable.
Yeah, and you want to ask yourself, would I give this to all my kids or am I just giving it to them because they're the oldest? That's something I think about a lot.
Yeah.
And same with our youngest. She is a baby of our family, and I recognize that sometimes I baby her a lot. Well,
and again, in the research, it suggests that not only do parents baby the youngest, but the older siblings also do the same thing.
Yes, everyone babies our baby, who's 3.
Yeah, which, again, it's not a real baby, but but that does have an effect. Yeah. But in terms of, let's say, if you were to look at the legitimate studies of personality traits, the Big 5 is considered the most legitimate. The effects later in life are essentially nothing, null.
Well, that's good. That's a breath of fresh air for parents.
I find interesting because if it's not really about personality, why do we all seem to recognize these birth order traits in our own families? Like if you look at your siblings and I look at my siblings, I feel like I could be like, the birth order effects make sense. Mm-hmm. So are we literally just seeing what we expect to see? Is that just confirmation bias at work?
I feel like it's easy to have that confirmation bias, right? Because so many kids carry so many traits, right? Like I think about, let's say, our middle. I could easily make the oldest born traits work for her too, right? She's a leader. Yeah, she's totally a leader. She's a rule follower. Yep, she's a rule follower. Whatever the oldest born traits are, I could pretty much fit it to any of our kids. So it's very easy to confirm and in your mind, right? I could also make the baby of the family traits work for our middle child, right? So I think it's just the confirmation bias, I think, is so easy to have. And I think a lot of the times it makes sense given their different stages of life, because you're looking at one kid who is more mature and one kid who is younger. So, so it makes sense.
Let's talk about your siblings then. If you look at them as kids versus now, do you think those personality traits line up or don't line up? Or could you line up different traits for yourself? Like, that's what I'm trying to figure out, because I feel like you could I could still see it, but maybe again, that's just...
To be honest with my siblings, so I'm the oldest and I have 2 younger brothers. And as kids, I could see these roles, right? Like my youngest was the baby of the family. My middle brother is a middle brother. You know, I'm the oldest. But now I really do see us all on equal ground. Like I've noticed that the older that we get, sure, we all have our unique temperaments, but I do think that is more of like a temperament thing than a birth order thing. I think now we're all in our careers, we're all doing certain things with our lives, and I don't really see the birth order as such a profound difference in who we are as people. I think that's really different now that we are all established and have our own lives and our own kids and families. So to be honest, I was thinking about that as you're reading the research. I'm like, yeah, that makes sense to me. I think the playing field is kind of evened out. But that doesn't mean our birth order doesn't have an impact on us, right? Like my youngest brother, he had to live at home for quite a few years with no siblings there, right? That's going to have an impact on you because me and my other brother were gone at school, right? I was the oldest. I was the first to do everything. Of course, it's going to have an impact on me too. It's not a bad thing, but your role in the sibling, like in the line of your siblings, of course, is going to have an impact on just who you become.
Yeah, it's, again, the environment you grew up in, so that does have an effect.
Yeah.
But, again, what the research is suggesting is it has very little effect on on your personality, at least.
Right.
So that's the first line of questioning, was just based on personality. And what I found is that, and some of these studies were huge, like tens of thousands to hundreds of thousands of people looked at to determine if there were any major differences between the siblings within a family.
Yeah.
And like there were a few minor ones, like oldest tend to be very, very slightly more rule followers and less agreeable.
It's true for you.
I thought I was a baby of the family
I'm just
too.
kidding. Okay.
That's fine.
Okay.
Middle are slightly higher on agreeableness. The latest born children are typically very slightly higher on agreeableness. But the differences were so minor that you wouldn't actually see it in everyday life.
Yeah.
And then, like only children were lower on agreeableness, but higher on like conscientiousness, and so it. But again, the differences were so minor that essentially these huge studies said the effect is null.
Yeah.
Which I found very interesting because that's not what I expected at all.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's interesting too. I think to me it makes sense that you can't just blame everything on I'm a firstborn, I'm a secondborn, I'm a thirdborn. It's more the way you were parented. And
we'll get into that later.
Yeah.
No.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So where does it matter? So where are the subtle effects?
Yeah.
So birth order might not make you a rebel, but the research points to a small but real effect on intelligence, interestingly. And again, it's in huge studies. So what's going on there, do you think? Are firstborns actually smarter?
Is it firstborns that
Yes.
are showing to be more intelligent? I wonder if, because I could see this happening with our own kids, like you pour a little bit more time and energy into teaching your firstborn stuff, but the more kids you have, the harder it is to pour that time and energy into things. And so you leave it maybe more up to teachers, or you read them less books when they're kids. Like our firstborn, we read her so many books. Like I was reading her so many books every single day. I was teaching her the alphabet. I taught her how to sign, all these things. But by the time you have your thirdborn, if you have three, you have two older kids. And so I'm definitely not doing the same amount of that with our thirdborn child as I did with our first. Mm-hmm. So to me, if that has, and we know that reading and teaching these things early on does impact intelligence later on, right? So to me, that actually makes sense, just given the time parents can spend and how that gets divided the more kids that you have.
Yes. That's pretty much what I found. But it was so minor. It was like, I think it was 0.1 standard deviations higher. So it was, again, essentially you would never see any difference in real life with your kids. And yet it has largely to do with the fact that you spend a little bit more time with them. Mm-hmm. They're the first. So especially when they're firstborn, you're spending more just one-on-one time with them, helping them develop.
Yeah.
Apparently the biggest factors came down to the size of the family, but when that was controlled for socioeconomic status, it had to do with that. So it's basically the amount of time and resources parents have to pour into their children. So let's say our kids, like we have no problem getting them books or bringing them to the library. We don't have the extra stress of living in an area where like everyone is impoverished. Mm-hmm. They don't have they don't have enough food, like any of that, where we are living. And that has a huge impact on the level of intelligence, and the differences are far less when controlled for the socioeconomic status.
Right.
And that status is often a predictor of the size of families. So it's like bigger families tend to score lower on, like the kids tend to score lower on IQ tests. But it seems like socioeconomic status has a huge impact on the size of families as well. So usually impoverished families have bigger families.
Interesting.
So I just found that to be very interesting. All this is to say, firstborns are, in real life, they're the same. All your kids will be pretty much exactly the same. There'll be very little difference. Again, it has to do with how much effort and time you can put in to their education and the resources that you have available for them to continue educating themselves.
Yeah, and I feel like also, I'm sure you'll get to this, but genetics play a role in that. Neurodiversity plays a role in that, right?
But these studies were huge, and they controlled for all of those things. And it's essentially pretty much no difference. There's like the slightest, what they said was the slightest statistically significant difference for firstborn children being slightly more, scoring more in, firstborn children score very slightly higher on IQ tests. That doesn't necessarily make them smarter, but...
Yeah.
Okay, so let's get practical then. Your job. Is there any truth to the idea that firstborns are more likely to be CEOs and laterborns are more likely to be entrepreneurs? So what skills do you think we're learning in our family roles, if that's true?
Yeah, I guess it kind of comes down to what we were talking about before in parentification in the firstborn children, right? So they might just have more experience leading because, I mean, I even think about our daughter, right? She's 8, but she has her 5-year-old sister who's like, does pretty well, but still has her big moments, and her 3-year-old sister who's a 3-year-old who has lots of tantrums, right? So from a very young age, 8 years old, you get used to dealing with conflict, navigating the sibling conflict, deciding when to pull back, deciding when to intervene, having to have that strong, loud voice that says, you can't come into my room and take my stuff. Problem solving skills. Like, I feel like there's certain skills she has to have at this age that probably the other girls will get as they get older too, that I could see could help in a leadership position later on. Right. And I remember having to do the same thing when I was the oldest child. You have your two little brothers and they want things from you, or they want to play and you want to play with your friends. Like, so you just have to learn some of those skills. So it makes sense to me that more of them might end up in a leadership position just because you're used to taking that role.
And I think, don't quote me on this, although we're quoting it on the podcast. Mm-hmm. Take this with a grain of salt. But I think it was firstborns are 3 times more likely than average to be in those roles.
Very interesting.
And I can't remember what it was for the later born children for being entrepreneurs and all that. But it's like, if you look at the average, that was the, let's say, the biggest effect that can be seen is the types of roles that are taken on by adults based on their birth order.
Yeah. Interesting.
Which, yeah, honestly is very interesting. Oh, yeah, and one other thing was that, so later born children, so that includes middle and the youngest, they are used to practicing more unconventional strategies to get their parents' attention. So that is why they're more likely to, let's say, start their own business. And when they're in the leadership positions, there's studies that show the CEOs that were later born they're slightly more unconventional. They don't just follow, like, they're not rule followers. They think outside of the box a little bit more.
Right, a little more creative, a little more think outside the box, because they probably, they had to do that because they're like, I'm competing with all these other kids' attention. So I got to figure out creative ways to figure this out for myself.
Again, all of this, I'm going to reiterate, is
slight.
in the very large scale, but in general terms, you're not going to see any difference. Yeah. That's how slight the differences are. And for risk-taking and creativity, the evidence is mixed and actually inconsistent. So many large studies have found no effect on both of those. So there's no clear pattern linking a specific birth order with being more of a risk-taker or more creative. So, like I said, there are some studies that show CEOs in those positions that are in different birth order positions, it makes a difference. There are other studies that show
to me, it makes total sense.
That's why it's slow. It's so slight. So then I also looked at the family size, because I feel like that makes a difference. The number of children, the age gaps, and the gender composition of families. And it's a critical factor that can actually amplify, reduce, or even reverse any potential birth order effects that you would think of stereotypically. So you can't generalize about birth order without actually considering the size of the family, the age gaps, and the gender of your children, because they make such a huge difference.
So tell me about the size of the family.
So the size of the family, it ends up diluting parental resources, which includes time, money, attention.
Makes sense.
Right? And it becomes more pronounced in larger families, which can magnify the small intellectual advantage of firstborns. Because they're the first, they're usually getting the most resources. So that's where what I was saying before about firstborns being tending to score higher on the IQ tests, it is magnified in larger families. Yeah. Okay, and then, so when it comes to intelligence, let's say there's a bigger gap, but then children from larger families tend to score higher on pro-social traits like agreeableness and honesty and humility, which the research was suggesting is because they have to learn how to share more. They have to learn how to cooperate more. So they're learning some of the pro-social skills versus the getting as much time, money, and attention in their education.
Right.
What effect do you think age gaps has? I know you said something earlier.
Yeah, I think the age gap would have a big effect on, I think on parenting. I even think about the subtle difference for us between our first two, where there's a 3-year age gap. And so our oldest was 3 when we had a baby, and it felt decently manageable because we could talk to her. She understood things. We could ask her to help us out. Go grab a diaper for your sister, whatever. And she could do that. She liked watching TV, which was helpful for us at the time, you know, versus when we had our third, our second daughter was just 2. Like, she had just turned 2, and she has a more sensitive temperament. But that transition was so much harder because she was in the thick of tantrum. She couldn't understand things the same way. She was really still at 2, kind of a baby, like needed us a lot more. And so I always look back on that and I'm like, oh, that was such a hard transition. Because now, let's say when our final child turned 2 and 3, she never had a sibling, right? There was like no baby. So we could still lay with her to sleep. We could have more mental space and energy for her tantrums because we didn't have someone else having tantrums too, you know, or a baby crying. So I think in that way, the age gap really impacts you because sometimes you have to grow up a lot quicker than your siblings, right? Like, I think for our second child, like, she had to like get into a big bed because the baby needed the crib. Like, all of these things, like, there's ways she had to grow up quicker just because of the age gap versus, let's say, even if we wanted another kid and we had them in 2 years, like, that would be so different for our current youngest child, right? So yeah, anyway, I just think the age gap impacts the parental capacity, the way that we can pour into our kids, the way they have to grow up quicker or not. So to me, of course, that's going to make a difference. And even one more thing I haven't noted, but even in the sibling relationship, right? Like, think of, let's say, your dad and his youngest sibling, how they're like 18 years apart or something like that.
I think it was either 17 or 19 years difference.
Right. So then immediately, if you're 17 years somewhere in there.
I think it was 19, actually.
19 years apart, your relationship is going to be completely different with your sibling. Like, of course, it makes sense that you'd take on maybe more of a parental role or you'd appear more like an uncle or something like that than like a sibling than if you're 18 months apart, right? Like, so of course it makes a difference.
Yeah. Well, it mostly, so yes, that is correct. The larger an age gap is, the more it effectively restarts the birth order clock.
Yeah.
And that means that there's, again, those slight variations with everyone after. Mm-hmm. So if there's a huge difference between your first and second born, and then you have 2 more after that, the first and the second born are more likely to have slightly more similar traits. And that's partly because your oldest, again, is more of like a peer.
Right.
And kind of a mentor for them versus
you're all
that
the same
typical
age,
sibling where,
yeah.
Our age gap's 3 and 2 years. That's, I think, a pretty typical age gap.
Yeah.
So you'll still see those effects, but the larger that age gap becomes, the more it kind of shapes the effects of the birth order.
Yeah, and that's not to say it's bad. Like,
no.
I know lots of people who have, let's say, a 7-year age gap between their kids. They just needed that time, or there's fertility issues or whatever it is.
Yep.
I think it can be great, right? It is not to say it's bad or good. It's just it has different impacts.
Honestly, this is, again, one of those topics where I feel like you could go into each individual piece of it.
Yeah.
In the end, it's important to know that it's so complex, it doesn't boil down to birth order.
Yeah.
Because I was even seeing some research, which I didn't include in here, but children born at different stages, so in different orders, after or before a miscarriage happened in the family, makes a huge difference as well. Mm-hmm. Or not a huge difference, but it changes things slightly for the children as well. There's so many different variables that go into it.
Like you could say I had 2 kids and then a parent passed away and then I had to deal with that trauma and then I had another kid. So the way I treated them was different because and that's where I say it comes or like you lost your job. Like, so you thought having the 3rd kid was going to be easier, but then you lost your job right before you had your 3rd kid. So now finances are an issue, right? So then they're not the typical 3rd kid because you're so stressed out. That's where I really do think it comes so much more down to how are we uniquely parenting each of our kids versus where do they fall in the birth order.
Right. So, yeah. Summary, the age gap does make a difference, a very slight difference.
Yeah.
It can turn the child that is born after that big gap to take on different roles than maybe they otherwise would have. What about gender? Do you think that has any... I mean, I've already said that it does.
Yeah, you've already said that. So why don't you tell me what you found?
So a gender mix of siblings can override the birth rank. So you can kind of disregard the birth rank because of it. Being the only boy among sisters or vice versa creates a unique status that has a greater impact than the simple numerical order that you're in the family.
Yeah, I've noticed that in my own life, right? Because I'm the only girl in my family. And so I feel like that impacts me, right? I have no other females to be compared to. I'm the only girl. So when there's things that like traditional girly things that my mom's doing, I'm the only one going, right? And I think about that often with our 3 girls. Like if there's something I'm doing, like let's say I'm going to go get my nails done. Now, that's not to say I wouldn't invite a boy to go get his nails done with me too, right? But all 3 of them want to come, or I want to go and try on dresses for some sort of event. All 3 of them are there. They want to do it.
Yep.
Right? It's not like I can be like, okay, just you today. Like, no, everyone wants to do everything with me. Whereas like, I remember with my mom, that was special quality time we had together because that was just the 2 of us. My brothers they weren't interested in doing those things. So for sure, that makes it like such a difference. I can't imagine, and maybe I would have loved having a sister, I don't know. But I can't imagine sharing all those moments. Like my mom and I think we're able to develop a bond. And even now, I'm still, like she has my sisters-in-laws who she takes great care of and absolutely loves, but I'm still her only like daughter, right? So it definitely just has an impact on the role that you play. Yeah.
Yeah, but do you think, like you're saying you developed a deeper bond with your mom because it was just the 2 of you, but do you think that the girls, if they're going to get their nails done with you or something like that, aren't still developing that deeper bond?
Oh, I think they definitely are. It's just different because
they're also bonding with each other too at the same time.
Yeah, because their sisters are going to be part of those memories for them, right? And you can tell me if you grew up with sisters because I didn't. So I don't have this to look back on. I am very close with my brothers, I will say. I'm very close with both of them. But everyone I talk to who grew up with 3 girls is like, oh, it's so nice for your girls. Oh, I can't imagine life without my sister. Like, oh, my sister's like my best friend and we're so close. We did everything together as kids. Like, it just seems like no matter who I talk to who grew up with 3 girls in their family, it's like, oh, it's so special for your kids. Like,
oh, really?
And so that's interesting to me. I'm very close with my brothers, so I don't think it's like you can't have that relationship. Like, my brothers are still the people I call if I have a hard time, like that, and their spouses, right? Like, that's who we turn to. So maybe it is the same, but it just seems like people have very special bonds with sisters.
No, again, it is. The research suggests that it is different.
Okay, interesting.
Not in a bad or good way necessarily, but it can increase the competition and make it more intense between same-sex siblings.
Mm-hmm. I've heard that as well.
So there can, potentially be that because we have 3 girls, it would be very easy to compare each of them to each other as they're getting older and say, well, this one did this and you need to step it up. Like, you could very easily do that.
Absolutely. I could see that. Even
internally, they could do that.
Yeah. Let's say they're all similar ages. So as soon as they get a little bit older, they'll probably be competing for the same sports teams or like doing the same kind of stuff in that way, right? So I could see how as they get older, even friends wise, like that could be more of a struggle for them.
Okay, let's talk quickly about the middle child syndrome. So is it a real phenomenon, or is it just what happens when you're neither the trailblazer, like the oldest, nor the baby?
I think any child can experience what we think is the middle child syndrome. I think it's actually more about being the child who doesn't have the highest needs at that moment in time, right? So I think a lot of middle children experience this because, let's say, their older siblings in school for the first time, they're doing lots of things. At school, they have extracurriculars, like they're kind of experiencing all these firsts, right? Your middle child, you've already been through all those firsts, so they're not as big of a deal for you. And then if you have three, your last child's like, this is the last time they're experiencing
I can imagine you're going to be so emotional with all of the last time for all these different things.
So, and your youngest maybe just needs you like longer, whatever, for certain things. So the middle child, I can see how they can get forgotten. But I've also seen how I feel the same way sometimes towards our baby of the family, right? Where like the two older kids, they need things, or they have to go to camp, or they have to go to school, or they're doing a play. And the last child just comes along for the ride. And you're not giving that same special attention. And I've seen it in our oldest, where she's like, you care more about my sisters than you care about me, because the two little ones need more time and attention. So I personally don't think it's just the middle child, but I do think the more kids you have, the more mindful you have to be about how is my attention being divided, and is it equal? And often it's not equal. Is it fair? Is there going to be time when I'm able to spend time with this child who hasn't had my time and attention?
Yep.
Like I did a post on this about the oldest child recently, and I had a lot of people saying they felt like I was shaming them. It wasn't about shaming. It was about reminding ourselves. Like, I know for me, our oldest is very well behaved. She does her own thing, and she's not always saying like, hey guys, you spend more time with my little sisters who are having big meltdowns than me. Right. So I don't
It's our
think
job as parents to figure that out.
Yeah, we have to figure that out. So I don't think it's just the middle. I think often it can be the middle. Makes sense because your oldest is doing things for the first time, your youngest is doing things for the last time. Both are highly charged emotional things. And the middle can feel like, well, no one cared the first time I did this. No one cared as much about my first day of school or my first time doing this sport or whatever, right? So I just think we have to be mindful of it. We're going to hurt all of our kids' feelings at some point. So we just want to be aware of where we're spending our time and energy.
I think that makes sense. I wonder if, this is what I did not find in the research, was if shorter age gaps amplify the effects of birth order more or not. Right? Because if you think about, you have 3 kids stacked one after the other within 2 years of each other each. If that makes a bigger difference or not, I don't know. Maybe I'll have to do some follow-up research on that.
Yeah, I would be curious.
Because I could foresee then, if the age gap is not that big, so the developmental needs of all of them are not so drastically different, if you would be more likely to kind of forget about that middle child. So let's say if you have your oldest, and then 18 months later you have your middle, and then a couple years later you have your youngest, which is, we know people that have done it that way.
Pretty normal, yeah.
If in that situation, the middle child is so close in age to both that they actually are potentially more forgotten because of it.
And I think you're kind of like, you want them to grow up maybe a little quicker because you have a baby, right? Although I will say, I was thinking about this actually on the way in this morning. So our kids are in camp because it's the summer and we're working, and they also like it. But when our oldest went to camp for the first year, she was 5. Okay, so that's the same age as our middle child. Mm-hmm. And I had this expectation, because she has aftercare at the camp, that she would be able to kind of stay the whole day and be fine when I picked her up. So I'm like, you're 5 now. Like, you should be fine to do that. Right? And now,
really?
Yeah. Well, and I had a baby at home.
Oh, true. Yeah,
That's when I had our baby. and a toddler at home. Actually, I had a baby and a toddler at home. So I needed her to go to camp for the whole day so that I was able to get some work done while taking care of the baby and the toddler, right? Life was chaos. And I would pick her up at the end of the day, every day. So she'd be there 9 to 5, and she'd have total meltdowns. She'd lose her cool. She was really struggling. And I'd be like, you're 5. Like, what the heck? Like, you know, I was in survival mode. That was the hardest season of my entire life, right? So there's grace there. But today I'm dropping off our 5-year-old at camp, and I'm like, sweetie, do you want me to pick you up early? Like, I'm worried that today's just going to be too long for you.
I can only imagine her response to that.
And she's like, Mom, I want to go to aftercare. Like, let me stay. It's so fun. Like, we get to play Barbies.
Yeah, they have like thousands of toys in aftercare that they would never get to play with otherwise.
Yeah, and I'm just like, are you sure, sweetheart? Like, Dad or I can leave work. We'll pick you up early. Like, it's just a really long day, and I'm just like worried about you. And I'm just thinking in my head, like, this is where these differences come out, right? With our oldest, it's like, I didn't have a choice. I needed the help. Like, that was my village when she had to go to camp those days. That was our village. And life is just different now. And I'm like, I can pick you up earlier. And I just see you as more of a baby than I saw our oldest. So I feel like those are the little things that shape their personality, which you could spiral in guilt and shame over, or you can just acknowledge that that is what life was then, you know, versus what life is now. But yeah, I thought that was interesting. I caught myself saying that this morning, and then I was like, man, I felt bad for our oldest for a moment there. She ended up loving camp that summer. It was like her favorite thing to do. But
oh yeah, 100%. I mean, it was probably less chaotic than being at home with 2 very young children, right? So, and then she loved sitting in the corner playing with all these new toys, kind of on her own or with one other kid or something like that at the time.
It was the first week that those meltdowns happened, but then it got way easier.
Yeah.
But I do remember the camp director that week looking at me and being like, do you need help at home? And me being like, yeah. So that was a rough summer for everyone, but that's a whole separate topic. But that's where childcare can be a part of your village, and it was.
So I think we've covered very generally. Hopefully I didn't misspeak on any of the research. I tried to be as accurate as possible as I could. But I just want to summarize that in general, birth order has next to no impact on, or the birth order itself has next to no impact on personality, intelligence, and most life outcomes and choices. It's so minor that you can't really consider it, at least on its own. So if birth order is such a tiny piece of the puzzle, what are the real heavy hitters when it comes to shaping who we become?
I mean, I think it's everything we always talk about, right? The relationship we have with our parents, the expectations that are put on us, right? So regardless of birth order, your parents put some expectations on you. Like I just mentioned, we put expectations on our kids. Sometimes they're realistic, sometimes they're not. That shapes who you become. The stress level of parents, I think that has a huge impact. We don't often talk about that. But like I was just outlining, when we had our 3rd baby, I was the most stressed out I've ever been, trying to juggle everything, right? So of course my parenting looked so different in those stages than it looks now. Now I can say things like, okay, girls, like, you know, I don't want you to have to be there like the full 8-hour day. Like maybe I'll pick you up, you know, at 7 hours or whatever, because it's just too much for you. I could never have done that during that season. And that's okay. That was just what that season was, right? And there's always room for repair and supporting your kids. But of course your stress level is going to impact your parenting. And prolonged parental stress does have an impact on kids, right? So sometimes it's looking at, okay, well, how can I navigate my own stress levels? And I think that has a huge impact as well. I think that is where we see, or where we talk about birth order differences, but it's also the stress level and the parent differences between kids. Even in, let's say with our oldest, right? You're so stressed out about sleep. You're stressed out about feeding. You're like worried about every little thing. Is she breathing? Like, waking up in the night to make sure.
Yes, that's kind of an experience thing, right? Like you're inexperienced as a parent with your first, but now with our third, we feel a lot more experienced.
Yeah, and maybe you stress out less about the little things.
Yep.
The more children you have, and let's say tantrums right now, they aren't my biggest worry. If our 3-year-old's having a tantrum, we know how to handle it. We've done tons of tantrums now, right? But with our oldest, I have different worries. I have friendship worries. I have screen time worries. I have worries about being exposed to inappropriate content. And maybe by the time our third is that age, we'll have figured out how to navigate that a little bit better, right? Those will still be worries, but I think that impacts your child too, right? When you're trying to figure out things for the first time. And so it's so much bigger than just what order are they born in. It's all about all the factors, where you live, right? With our first child, we lived in a really tiny basement apartment that got flooded and we had no home. So of course we had different stresses then than we have now. So I think we have to give ourselves grace too and know that our parenting might look different depending on the season that we're in. And if you're in that really hard season, like we've been many times in difficult seasons of parenting, and I'm sure we will be again, that doesn't mean it's always going to be like that. And to reflect on our own actions, the way we're treating all three of our, or however many kids you have, I think that's really important too, the parental reflection that needs to take place. I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
Yeah. So parenting style is the primary environmental factor when it comes to determining a child's intelligence level, their ability to relate with others, their personality. It's, let's say, the primary environmental factor. And like we've talked about, that warm structure or the authoritative parenting style, so warm and supportive, is consistently linked with the most positive outcomes. I mean, we've probably said this on every episode so far. And that includes higher self-esteem and better emotional stability.
Makes sense.
But that's just, I would say, the nurture aspect of it, nature. So genetics, behavioral genetics shows that apparently 30 to 60% of the variation in personality traits is actually due to inherited genetic factors.
We need to do an episode on that. Like, I love that topic. You would love it too, Scott.
Yeah, I mean, definitely, we can do that.
Yeah.
So this provides that fundamental temperament, like you were talking about, upon which the environment, which is our parenting style, actually acts.
Yeah.
Right. So the genetics is like the base, and then we're parenting on that base. And then the final most important factor in personality development is the socioeconomic status. That is a huge factor. So a family's financial resources, educational level, and the stressors associated with their economic situation have a profound impact on a child's development and life opportunities. So it just makes things significantly harder if you don't have enough time, resources, money to help your children develop. It's just a huge part of it.
Absolutely. I've seen that time and time again in clients, but even in our own life. If I look back to various seasons of life where finances have been a big stressor for us, right? Or you're traveling for work and I'm alone, or there's huge other stressors that are going on in our life. Of course, it makes sense that parenting is so much harder then. You have to think of your needs. If it's hard to even meet your own family's basic needs, like eating, food, a home, it makes it so much more difficult to do these additional things like nurturing the relationship and all of that when you're just trying to meet your basic needs, right? I think that makes so much sense.
So again, I find this topic to be very interesting because I thought there would be much bigger impact based on birth order, but it's there, but it's so small.
And I think what that tells us actually as a takeaway for parents too is to be really mindful of how much we just pass off as, well, they're a second child, or, oh, they're the baby of the family. Like, I think that actually gives us a bit of a wake up call to be like, let's not just pass off behavior or just like, be flippant about who they are, or even give them that narrative of like, I'm a firstborn, so I'm this, because that will be the confirmation bias, and that will become the stories they tell about themselves too, right? So I think if
that internal voice.
So I think it tells us, let's not feed into that narrative and give our kids that story. Instead, let's just treat them all as individual kids and try and meet their needs based on who they are as a person, their personality, like their uniqueness as well.
Yeah, for sure. So I think just to summarize or conclude, I guess, is maybe it's a good idea for us to think of birth order not as a determinant of personality, but just kind of as a label for the role that the child or where they are in the family. Because the role actually has such a minor and indirect influence, and it's really just on learned skills and some life choices like the career path. But again, it's so minor that it shouldn't really, I don't know, it almost is not worth even using that label. That's what it seems like. And its impact is dwarfed by the major forces of genetics, parenting style, and the socioeconomic status, like we were saying.
Yeah.
So just to finish, I wanted to do something a little bit different. I have a question for you, our listener. I want you to think about yourself in your own family. So if you have siblings and parents, or you were raised in a very under different circumstances than what you have currently, what role did you actually play, and how much of that was because of your birth order, do you think, versus everything else in the environment that you lived in that makes you you?
I love it. Ending on a self-reflection.
Yeah, I thought that was this.
You know what? I've been thinking this whole episode. I feel like the students become the master. Like, look at you with your research, talking about these things. I feel like you're just becoming so well-versed in the parenting space, and not only that, but like fascinated with it.
Yes,
it's
definitely
really
fascinated.
Fun for me to have watched. Like, and I hope that this is happening for our listeners as well, as I know so many of you listen. Like, you're there Monday morning, every episode, like listening to these episodes, right? But I hope this is happening for you too, as you listen to the episodes, where you're getting more excited about the information. You're seeing how it all links together. Everything kind of comes back to this foundational relationship and the way that we parent our kids, right? And that you can see that no matter what your profession is or who you are, like, this can be fascinating and exciting and fun to learn about. I feel like it's been really cool to watch you go from like, oh, fine, I'll do this podcast with you, but I'm going to ask you all these skeptical questions, to you being like, Jess, I can't wait to tell you what I learned about birth order, right? Like, he was so excited. I had to tell him, like, don't tell me till we start the podcast today. But I don't know. It's been really cool to watch that journey for you over the last year. And my hope is that that's a similar journey to what people are going on who are listening. And that's what I've been hearing. And like, I just wanted to say too, to our listeners, like, thank you. I feel like I see more and more people sharing the podcast, people talking about the episodes. We're getting more and more comments about the episodes and DMs and emails. And every week there's more subscribers and listeners, and it's just really cool to see. So
yeah, honestly, it's been since you allowed me to do a bit more research in preparation for the episodes, I have been way more fascinated.
Yeah.
And I feel like, let's say with this one and all of the, like, let's say the past 10 that we've done, I feel like the more I've been learning about it, the less I feel like I actually know, which is a weird, I feel like I do know more than I did before, but because of that, I realize how much there is that I now do not understand.
Or like biases that you bring in, like the birth order. You probably thought, oh, it's going to be pretty concrete, like firstborn's this, secondborn, whatever.
Yeah,
right?
On average across humanity, yeah.
So I think even the fact that you are spending this time to even check out your own biases and see what's there and learn, I don't know. It's been really cool to see. And I wanted to note that because I'm just hearing that from everyone too, who listens every week. And I love that we can provide that for folks. And
thanks for the positive reinforcement.
Yeah. Check. Maybe we have to talk about that next time. Sticker boards.
What didn't we? We had an episode on. Oh, we talked about. That was different.
Different. All right. Well, thanks for listening.
Yeah. Thanks so much. It was fun.
Yeah. See you next week. Hey, thank you so much for being here and listening to this episode today. It means the world to us to have you here. If this conversation was helpful for you, it would mean a lot if you could like and subscribe. That just shows us if the conversation is meaningful and helpful and helps it get out to more people. Also, I just wanted to let you know that every week we have a new episode drop. And if you want to be notified when that happens, just hit the little bell icon. Again, thank you so much for being here, and we'll talk to you again next week.